Honey, are you sure you don't mind me going on this business trip? Jessica's voice was light and casual, though there was an edge to it that Weston didn't notice. She leaned against the kitchen counter, her suitcase propped up by the door. Weston glanced up from his laptop, brushing a hand through his messy hair. Of course not, Jess. Go kill it out there. I've got everything covered here, he said with a relaxed smile. He closed the lid of his laptop and stood, walking over to her. Just don't forget to bring me back one of those local chocolates you always rave about. Jessica chuckled, her eyes briefly darting to her phone on the counter before meeting his gaze. You're the best, Weston. Always so thoughtful. She stepped closer and let him plant a kiss on her forehead, her hands resting lightly on his chest. You better, he teased, stepping back and giving her a mock-serious look. I'll hold you to it. Jessica smiled again, picking up her phone and slipping it into her handbag. I'll call you once I get there, she said, adjusting the strap of her bag and glancing at the clock. I should get going. Traffic to the airport's probably crazy. Yeah, don't want to miss your flight. Drive safe, Weston said, following her to the door. He grabbed her suitcase and rolled it out to the car for her. Jessica opened the driver's side door and paused, looking at him. Thanks for always being so supportive, Weston, she said softly, her expression unreadable for a moment. Not everyone's husband would be so understanding about their wife traveling so much. Weston shrugged, brushing off the compliment. We're a team, Jess. That's what marriage is about, right? Jessica nodded, her smile tightening slightly. Right? She climbed into the car, started the engine, and rolled down the window. I'll see you in a few days, she said, waving as the car backed out of the driveway. Weston waved back, standing in the doorway until her car disappeared down the street. Inside, Weston returned to his laptop, his thoughts already shifting to the work he'd planned for the evening. He wasn't a man who doubted easily, and his trust in Jessica had been unwavering since the day they met. She'd always been ambitious, her career demanding frequent travel and late nights. Weston had never questioned it. He admired her drive and took pride in her success. As he worked, his phone buzzed on the desk. A text from Jessica lit up the screen. Boarding soon. Love you. Weston smiled, typing back a quick reply. Love you too. Have a safe flight. He placed the phone down and turned back to his laptop, his mind clear of any suspicions. The evening passed quietly, the house unusually still without Jessica's presence. He made himself a simple dinner, flipping through channels on the TV before settling into bed early. Jessica, meanwhile, pulled into a secluded parking lot near the airport, her fingers drumming on the steering wheel. She checked her reflection in the rearview mirror, touching up her lipstick and smoothing her hair. Her phone buzzed, and she picked it up without hesitation. Hey, I'm here, she said into the phone, her tone completely different, lighter, more carefree. Perfect. I'm pulling in now, a man's voice replied. Jessica's lips curled into a smile as she spotted a sleek black car pulling into the lot. The driver's side door opened and Greg stepped out, his confident stride unmistakable. He was tall, with an easy charm that had always drawn people to him. Jessica got out of her car, glancing around the empty lot before walking over to him. Greg smirked as she approached, pulling her into a quick but passionate kiss. Missed me, he asked, his tone teasing. Always, Jessica replied, her eyes sparkling. Let's get out of here before someone sees us. Greg chuckled, opening the passenger door of his car for her. Don't worry, babe. No one's going to catch us. Jessica slid into the seat, her heart racing with the thrill of secrecy. As Greg drove, their conversation was casual but intimate, filled with inside jokes and lingering touches. Neither of them spared a thought for the man who had just waved Jessica off with a trusting smile. Back at home, Weston lay in bed scrolling through photos of him and Jessica on his phone. Their anniversary trip to Italy, a cozy Christmas morning by the fire, lazy Sundays spent hiking in the nearby trails, each image a testament to the life they had built together. He set the phone down on the nightstand, sighing contentedly. Good night, Jess, he murmured into the dark room, unaware of how far she truly was from him, in every way that mattered. Weston was in his home office later that evening, surrounded by the comforting hum of his computer and the faint ticking of the clock on the wall. He was reviewing spreadsheets when his phone buzzed on the desk. He glanced at the screen. It was Jessica. A smile spread across his face as he picked up. "Hey, Jess. Miss me already?" There was silence. At first, Weston thought the call had dropped, but then he heard muffled voices. He frowned, pulling the phone closer to his ear. "Hello? Jess? Are you there?" he said, his voice tinged with confusion. The muffled voices grew clearer. A man's voice spoke, low and smug. "Your husband really thinks you're working? What an idiot." Weston's heart stopped, his body stiffening. That voice was unmistakable. Greg, his best friend. "That clueless loser is paying for everything while you enjoy my Big Johnson," Greg added, his tone dripping with arrogance. The words hit Weston like a punch to the gut. He froze, his breath caught in his chest. Then Jessica's laughter rang out, sharp and cruel. "He's too dumb to realize I've checked out of the marriage a long time ago," she said, her voice devoid of the warmth Weston had known for years. "Don't bother mentioning him now. He makes me puke." Weston's hand trembled, his knuckles whitening as he gripped the phone. His stomach churned, disbelief and anger warring within him. He wanted to yell, to demand answers, but his voice wouldn't come. The call abruptly ended, leaving him staring at the screen, the call disconnected message glowing like a cruel taunt. Weston sat in silence, the phone still in his hand. His mind raced, replaying the conversation over and over. Had he really heard what he thought he heard? Jessica, Greg, together, talking about him like he was a joke. He stood abruptly, the chair scraping against the floor. His heart pounded in his chest as he paced the room. "This can't be real," he muttered to himself, running a hand through his hair. But the voices were undeniable. The people he trusted most had betrayed him in the worst way possible. He slammed his hands on the desk, the sound echoing in the quiet room. "Damn it," he shouted, his voice cracking with raw emotion. The betrayal cut deeper than he could have imagined. Jessica, the woman he'd loved and supported unconditionally, and Greg, the friend who'd been like a brother to him. Weston grabbed his phone and replayed the call in his mind, trying to make sense of it. His fingers hovered over Jessica's contact, the urge to confront her burning inside him. But he stopped himself. "No," he said aloud, his voice firm. "Not yet." Instead, he opened his laptop and began digging. He pulled up their shared bank account, scanning through transactions. Nothing seemed out of the ordinary at first, but then he noticed a series of charges, hotel bookings, expensive dinners, all made during Jessica's so-called business trips. His jaw tightened as the pieces fell into place. Next, he checked her social media. Jessica's accounts were sparse, but Greg's told a different story. He'd posted photos from trips that coincided with Jessica's travel dates. The same cities, the same restaurants. One photo even showed a glimpse of her in the background, her face partially obscured but unmistakable to Weston. His anger grew with each discovery. The lies, the deceit, it was all laid out before him. He clenched his fists, his mind racing with the weight of it all. Weston's phone buzzed again, snapping him out of his thoughts. It was a text from Jessica. "Hope your night's going well. Love you." The audacity of her words made his blood boil. He stared at the message, his thumb hovering over the keyboard. 100 responses ran through his mind, each one more venomous than the last. But he didn't reply. Instead, he set the phone down and took a deep breath. He needed a plan. Confronting her in the heat of the moment would accomplish nothing. He wanted answers, yes, but more than that, he wanted justice. He wanted her and Greg to feel the weight of their actions, to understand the depth of the pain they caused. Weston spent the next hour methodically gathering evidence. He saved screenshots of Greg's posts, downloaded bank statements, and documented everything he'd found. As he worked, his anger transformed into a cold, calculated determination. They thought they'd gotten away with it, but they were wrong. By the time he finished, it was past midnight. Weston sat back in his chair, exhaustion tugging at him, but sleep was the last thing on his mind. He stared at the evidence spread out before him, his resolve solidifying. "You've messed with the wrong man," he muttered, his voice low but steady. Weston didn't sleep that night. By the time the first rays of dawn broke through the blinds, he had meticulously mapped out his plan. The initial sting of betrayal had dulled, replaced by a cold, steely resolve. He wasn't going to lash out blindly. No, Weston wanted his actions to be precise, calculated, devastating. The next morning, Weston's demeanor was calm, almost eerily so. He went about his usual routine, making coffee and checking emails, as if nothing had happened. But beneath the surface, his mind was a whirlwind of plans and emotions. Jessica called around noon, her voice cheerful. "Hey babe, just checking in. How's everything?" "Good," Weston replied evenly. "How's the trip?" "Busy as always," she said with a light laugh. "You know how it is?" "Yeah, I do," he said, his tone neutral. "Make sure to take some time for yourself." "I will." "Love you," she said before hanging up. Weston set the phone down, his jaw tightening. The ease with which she lied to him was staggering. But he didn't let it show. He had a role to play, and he intended to play it perfectly. "This isn't over," he said to himself, his voice filled with quiet determination. Not by a long shot. The first order of business was packing Jessica's belongings. He moved methodically through the house, starting in the bedroom. Her clothes were folded neatly into suitcases, her toiletries packed into a box. Even their wedding album, which she had shoved to the back of the closet months ago, went into the pile. As he worked, flashes of their life together surfaced in his mind. Their wedding day, lazy Sundays on the couch, their whispered plans for the future. Each memory felt like a blade twisting in his chest, but he pushed the emotions aside. "She doesn't deserve my tears," he muttered under his breath as he sealed the last box with tape. Next, Weston called a courier service. "I need these items delivered to this address," he said, reading off Greg's home address. The woman on the other end confirmed the pickup time, and Weston hung up without another word. He scribbled a note to include with the delivery. "She's your problem now. Enjoy." Placing the note on top of the pile, Weston couldn't help but let out a bitter laugh. It was petty perhaps, but satisfying. After the courier left with Jessica's belongings, Weston sat at the kitchen table with his laptop open. He dialed Olivia, his lawyer, a sharp and efficient woman he'd worked with during a property dispute years ago. "Weston," Olivia's voice was brisk. "What's going on?" "Olivia, I need your help. I'm filing for divorce and a restraining order." His voice was calm, but there was an undercurrent of restrained fury. There was a pause on the other end. "Infidelity?" she asked, her tone softening slightly. "Yes, my wife," and he hesitated, the words catching in his throat. "And my best friend." "I'm sorry, Weston," Olivia said sincerely. "Let's start with the basics. Do you have evidence?" "Plenty. Text messages, financial records, even photos," Weston replied, opening a folder on his laptop where he'd saved everything. "Good. We'll hit them hard." "People like this deserve no mercy," Olivia said, her voice steely. "I'll draft the documents and send them over for your signature. Do you want to file for sole ownership of the house?" "Yes," Weston said without hesitation. "It's in my name anyway. She can go live with Greg." They discussed the next steps in detail. By the time Weston ended the call, he felt a sense of clarity. The wheels were in motion. That afternoon, Weston walked into his local bank branch. He approached the counter and asked to speak with a manager. After a short wait, he was ushered into a small office. "How can I help you today?" the manager asked, smiling politely. "I need to freeze all joint accounts," Weston said. Immediately, the manager's eyebrows rose slightly, but he nodded. "Of course. May I ask the reason?" "Divorce," Weston said bluntly. "And I'd like to transfer my direct deposit to a separate account." The manager nodded again, tapping on his keyboard. Within minutes, the accounts were frozen, and Weston had opened a new account in his name only. He left the bank feeling lighter, as if shedding a weight he hadn't realized he was carrying. By evening, Weston was ready for the final step. He sat at his desk and typed out a letter to Jessica. "Jessica, by now, you've probably realized that your belongings are no longer at the house. I've sent them to Greg's address. It's where you belong. I know everything. The lies, the betrayal, the mocking laughter behind my back. You've made it clear how little you think of me, so let me make this clear in return. We're done. Don't contact me. Any communication will go through my lawyer. The divorce papers are on their way. Goodbye, Jessica." "Weston," He printed the letter and placed it in an envelope, sealing it with a decisive press. He set it on the counter where Jessica would see it immediately upon her return. That night, Weston sat on the couch with a glass of whiskey in hand. The house was eerily quiet, but for the first time, he welcomed the solitude. His phone buzzed with a text from an old college friend, Tom. "Hey man, long time no talk. Let's catch up soon." Weston stared at the message for a moment before typing back. "Definitely. Let me know when you're free." As he set the phone down, he realized he felt something he hadn't expected. Hope. The betrayal had shattered his world, but now he saw a chance to rebuild. He wasn't sure what the future held, but one thing was certain. He was done being anyone's fool. Jessica returned home 3 days later, luggage in hand, exhausted but satisfied after what she thought had been a relaxing getaway. As she stepped onto the porch, her first sign of trouble was the key. It didn't fit. She tried again, jiggling it with increasing frustration. Finally, she leaned on the doorbell, pressing it repeatedly. "What the hell?" she muttered under her breath. She dug out her phone and dialed Weston's number. The call didn't go through. A pre-recorded voice informed her that the number was no longer in service. Her heart sank as dread crept in. She looked around, noticing for the first time the lack of any sign that Weston was still living there. No car, no lights, nothing. Jessica turned to peer through the window and caught sight of something on the dining table. She pressed her hands to the glass, squinting to get a better look. It was a stack of papers, divorce papers. Next to them was a handwritten note in Weston's unmistakable scrawl. "Bitch, you belong to the streets. Goodbye." Her breath caught, and she stumbled back from the door. Panic set in. She pulled out her phone and frantically tried Weston's number again, only to be met with the same disconnected message. Her mind raced as she tried to piece together what was happening. Jessica drove across town to Greg's house, her hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly her knuckles turned white. Greg would explain, she told herself. Greg would know what was going on. But when she pulled into his driveway, her heart sank even further. Her belongings were there, scattered across the pavement in no discernible order. Suitcases, boxes, and loose items were haphazardly dumped as if discarded by someone in a rush. She stepped out of the car, her heels clicking on the concrete as she approached the pile. A wave of humiliation washed over her as she noticed neighbors glancing from their windows. "Greg!" she shouted, pounding on the front door. "Greg, open up!" There was no answer. Jessica checked her phone again and called him. It rang a few times before going to voicemail. Desperation clawed at her as she left a message. "Greg, it's me. What's going on? Call me back." Meanwhile, Greg was sitting in his car outside his former office building, staring at the termination letter in his hands. His world had collapsed in the span of 48 hours. Weston, it seemed, had sent his employer a damning dossier of evidence outlining Greg's unethical behavior. Evidence Greg didn't even know Weston had. The HR department had wasted no time. He was summoned for a meeting, confronted with the documents, and promptly fired. Greg's reputation, once stellar, was now in tatters. He had tried calling Jessica earlier, but her phone had gone straight to voicemail. Now, as he sat stewing in his car, he debated whether to call her again. "That bastard," Greg muttered, slamming the steering wheel. "He's ruined everything." Jessica, still standing in Greg's driveway, tried calling Weston's parents next. Maybe they knew where he was, but the number she had for them was disconnected as well. It was as if Weston had vanished into thin air, taking every connection to him with him. Her phone buzzed suddenly, and for a brief moment, hope flared. She snatched it up, only to see it was an email notification. She opened it, and her blood ran cold as she read the subject line. "To everyone who needs to know the truth." The email was from Weston. It had been sent to a long list of recipients, friends, family, and acquaintances. Jessica's face flushed as she scanned its contents. Weston had laid everything bare. Her affair with Greg, the financial exploitation, the lies. Attached were screenshots of text messages, photos, and bank statements. The tone of the email was calm, but devastatingly precise. By the time she finished reading, her hands were trembling. Back inside his car, Greg received the same email. He skimmed it quickly, his jaw clenching tighter with every sentence. Unbelievable, he muttered, throwing his phone onto the passenger seat. His hands itched to punch something, but he forced himself to stay calm. He needed a plan. Jessica's phone rang, jolting her from her stupor. It was Greg. Greg, where the hell are you? She snapped, her voice shaky with anger and fear. I just saw the email, Greg said flatly. He's torched us, Jess. My job, my reputation, everything's gone. What do you mean your job is gone? Jessica asked, her panic deepening. Weston sent my employer proof that I've been less than ethical. They fired me yesterday, Greg said bitterly. And now everyone knows about us. Jessica's knees wobbled, and she leaned against her car for support. He's destroyed my life, too. I can't even get into my own house. We need to talk, Greg said. Figure out what the hell we're going to do. Fine. Meet me at the coffee shop on 5th, Jessica said, her voice tight. She ended the call without waiting for a response. At the coffee shop, Jessica and Greg sat at a corner table, their faces pale and drawn. They spoke in hushed tones, their conversation punctuated by angry whispers and furtive glances. What's our next move? Jessica asked, stirring her coffee absently. We lay low for now, Greg said, rubbing his temples. Weston's gone, scorched earth. We'll have to pick up the pieces later. Jessica's eyes narrowed. He can't get away with this. Greg looked at her sharply. What are you going to do? Sue him? After what we did? We have no leg to stand on, Jess. We're screwed. She glared at him, but didn't respond. The realization that Greg was right settled over her like a heavy weight. For the first time, she wondered if she had underestimated Weston. Weston, meanwhile, was far from the chaos he had orchestrated. He had rented a small cabin in the mountains, disconnected from the grid. His days were peaceful, spent hiking and reflecting. He didn't feel victorious, not yet. But there was a sense of closure knowing that Jessica and Greg were finally reaping the consequences of their actions. Weeks passed after Jessica's heart-wrenching fall from grace. What she had once viewed as a carefree existence had become a nightmare. Her world had crumbled piece by piece as Weston drifted away from her life. The lies, the betrayal, the laughter, it all came crashing down. And now, she was left with nothing. She stood before the small, quiet house in the heart of the picturesque town, her hands shaking. The street was empty, the houses neat and well-kept, a stark contrast to the mess inside her own mind. Jessica hadn't thought this through. She hadn't prepared for the rejection, but she knew one thing for sure: she had to try. She couldn't let him go. Not like this. Her breath caught in her throat as she raised her fist and slammed it against the door. The sound echoed through the empty street. She banged again, harder this time, her desperation mounting with every second that passed. Weston, please. I made a mistake. I'm sorry. Her voice cracked, the mascara streaking down her face as her eyes filled with tears. She didn't care anymore. There was no pride left to protect, only the burning desire to fix what she had destroyed. The door creaked open, and there he was, Weston, standing in the doorway. His posture was stiff, his face unreadable. He looked different, hardened. The soft man she once knew was gone, replaced by someone colder, someone who had learned to shut off the world that used to matter to him. Sorry. His voice was low, almost mocking. You're sorry now that Greg's kicked you to the curb? You weren't sorry when you were laughing at me, when you thought I didn't know what you were doing behind my back. Jessica gasped. She opened her mouth to explain, but her words tangled in her throat. The shame of it all clung to her like a heavy blanket. She dropped her gaze, unwilling to meet his eyes. It wasn't like that, she said, her voice shaking. She wiped the tears away, her hands trembling. Please, Weston. I was confused. I made a mistake, and I hate myself for it. But I've learned. I swear I have. I want to fix this. I'll do anything. Just give me a chance. Weston's eyes hardened. He took a step back, his stance still firm, unyielding. His lips curled into a bitter smile that didn't reach his eyes. Fix this? Jess, the only thing I'm fixing is my life without you. And trust me, it's a hell of a lot better. She felt the words hit her like a slap. Her chest tightened, her breath quickened. She couldn't lose him. Not like this. Not after everything. She took a step forward, but he didn't budge. She could see the distance between them now, not just physically but emotionally too. "Please," she whispered, her voice barely audible. She reached out a hand toward him, but he didn't move. "Please, Weston, I love you. I need you. Can't you see that? Can't you see how much I've changed?" Weston shook his head. "You think you can just walk in here and turn everything around with a few empty words? After everything you did? After everything you put me through?" Jessica felt her heart shatter. The words hit her harder than she expected. She sank to her knees in front of him, the weight of her own guilt pulling her down. "I was stupid," she sobbed, her voice breaking. "I was selfish. But please, Weston, I'm begging you. Give me one more chance. I'll do anything. Anything at all." Weston's expression didn't soften. He folded his arms across his chest, looking down at her, his eyes cold. "Anything? What does that even mean, Jess? You're willing to say anything, but what about doing something? What about showing me that you've changed? Words don't mean anything anymore." "I'll prove it," she said, her voice rising with urgency. She stood quickly, wiping her face with her sleeve. "I'll prove it to you every day, if that's what it takes. Just let me show you. Please." Weston stepped back, his gaze never leaving hers. "Prove it," he repeated, as if the word tasted foreign on his tongue. "How are you going to prove anything to me, Jess? After everything?" Jessica felt a deep, aching silence settle between them. She thought of Greg, the man who had replaced her in Weston's life. She thought of how she had betrayed Weston, how she had taken him for granted. And now, all she had left was a plea, a desperate plea for mercy. "I don't care what it takes," she said, her voice more composed now, though still raw with emotion. "I will fight for you. I will fight for us. I won't give up, not until you see that I can be the woman you need, the woman you deserve." Weston's expression flickered, just for a moment. He was thinking, weighing her words, but his resolve remained firm. "You're too late for that, Jess. I've already moved on. I've already learned to let go. I can't keep doing this. I can't keep giving you chances only for you to throw them away." Jessica's breath hitched. She felt the weight of his words in her chest, suffocating her. She looked down at her hands, trembling in her lap, and then back up at him, her eyes pleading. "I don't want anyone else, Weston. I only want you," she whispered. Her voice was barely audible now, as though she feared even saying it would break the fragile connection they still shared. Weston didn't speak for a long time. He simply stood there, looking at her, his expression unreadable. Finally, he sighed, rubbing his hand across his face, as if trying to rid himself of the tension that had built up. "I don't want to do this anymore. I don't want to keep fighting for something that's already dead." Jessica closed her eyes, tears flowing freely now. She could feel the finality in his words, the quiet decision he had made. He was done with her, done with their past, and there was nothing she could say, no amount of pleading that could change that. "Please," she whispered one last time, her voice trembling with grief. Weston stepped back, his eyes never leaving her face. "Goodbye, Jess," he said softly, the words like a death sentence to everything they had once been. With that, he closed the door, and Jessica was left standing there, her body shaking with sobs, her heart breaking in the quiet of the evening. Weston sat at the corner table of a bustling cafe in his new city, sipping his coffee, the aroma rich and warm. The change had been drastic, but it felt right. He had moved months ago, leaving behind the remnants of his old life in the small town. Divorce papers had been signed, and Jessica had faded into the past, her presence no longer weighing on his mind like it once did. His new life was different, free from the burdens of betrayal and deceit. Weston had started to embrace activities he had neglected for years, painting, hiking, and spending afternoons reading in quiet parks. He no longer felt like he was living in someone else's shadow. The door to the cafe chimed, and his gaze flicked to the entrance. Millie walked in, her dark hair tied back in a loose ponytail, a bright smile on her face as she spotted him. She was everything he didn't expect, witty, sharp, and warm. When they first met, there was an easy connection between them. They spent hours talking, laughing, and exploring the city together. There was no pretense with her. She saw Weston for who he truly was, not the man shaped by his past mistakes. "Morning, Weston," Millie said, sliding into the seat across from him. "Morning, Millie," he replied, his face lighting up at the sight of her. The world around him seemed to pause when she smiled. "How's the painting going?" she asked, her eyes sparkling with interest. Weston shrugged, a small grin on his lips. "Better. I'm learning to let go of perfection. Just letting the colors flow. I bet you're great at it," Millie said, her voice warm. She was supportive, always encouraging him to pursue the things that made him happy. Weston took a deep breath, his hands wrapped around his coffee mug. "I've never really had time for this kind of thing before. It feels good, to actually be myself again." Millie raised an eyebrow. "And who is yourself, exactly?" Weston chuckled softly. "I guess I'm still figuring that out. But I know I'm not the guy who used to just sit around waiting for someone else to tell him what he wanted." Millie nodded, her eyes filled with understanding. "Well, whoever you are, I'm glad I get to see it." They spent the rest of the morning chatting about life, their dreams, and how they both wanted to travel more. For the first time in a long time, Weston felt content. Millie was no replacement for Jessica, but she was something better. She was someone who saw him not as someone to fix, but as someone who was worthy of love just as he was. Meanwhile, Jessica's life was anything but fulfilling. The day after Weston left, she had tried to piece together her life with Greg, thinking that perhaps their connection could salvage something. But it hadn't worked out that way. Greg had lost his job months ago and had yet to find a new one. The pressure of mounting bills and the weight of Jessica's tarnished reputation was too much for him. Their once passionate affair had slowly turned into a battleground. Their arguments became more frequent, filled with harsh words and bitter accusations. Greg resented Jessica for the mess she had caused, and Jessica hated herself for the situation they were in. One evening, as the two of them sat in their cramped apartment, Jessica stared out of the window, watching the rain fall. The silence between them was thick, heavy. It felt as though they were both drowning in their own misery. "How are we going to make this work, Greg?" Jessica asked, her voice hollow. Greg slammed his fist on the table, the frustration in his eyes evident. "You tell me. You're the one who destroyed everything. You think we could just start over like it didn't happen?" Jessica flinched, the words stinging more than she expected. "I didn't mean for this to happen, Greg. I didn't ask for any of this." "Well, too bad," Greg shot back. "You don't get to just undo it. You've ruined us, Jess. All you've done is drag me down with you." Jessica felt her heart sink. She had lost everything, Weston, her reputation, and now her relationship with Greg. She wanted to scream, to throw things, to make him see how badly she was hurting. But the words stuck in her throat. "I'm sorry," she whispered, though it felt empty. It had always felt empty, saying those words to him, to Weston. Greg scoffed. "Sorry doesn't fix anything. It's just a word, and frankly, I'm tired of hearing it." He stood abruptly, pushing his chair back, so hard it clattered to the floor. "I need a drink." Jessica sat there, her hands shaking. She had no idea how she had gotten here. When she had first left Weston, she had believed that Greg would be her solution, her escape from the wreckage of her life. But Greg was just another anchor dragging her down. And now, even he was slipping away. She pulled her knees up to her chest and buried her face in her hands, feeling the weight of her mistakes crushing her. Days blurred into weeks. The tension between Jessica and Greg escalated as their financial problems deepened. They fought constantly over money, over the future, over everything. Greg was bitter and angry, and Jessica was empty. Her attempts at fixing things only made them worse. She had nowhere to turn, no one to lean on. One night, after another argument that had ended with Greg storming out of the apartment, Jessica found herself sitting on the couch, staring at the phone in her hand. She hesitated, then dialed a number she hadn't thought of in months. The call connected, and she heard the familiar voice on the other end. "Weston." There was a long pause. "Jessica." Her throat tightened. She couldn't find the words she needed. I need help. I don't know what to do anymore." Weston's voice was calm, but she could hear the coolness in it. "I'm sorry, Jess. I don't think I can help you. I know I messed up, but I'm not asking for anything from you. I just need someone to tell me how to fix this," she said, her voice breaking. There was another long silence, and then Weston spoke, his tone softer. "You have to fix it on your own, Jess. No one could do that for you. Not me, not Greg, not anyone. You have to take responsibility for what you've done. Jessica's breath hitched as she felt the weight of his words. I don't know how, she whispered. You'll figure it out, Weston said quietly. But you need to start by accepting that it's not going to be easy. You can't undo what's been done. All you can do is move forward, even if you don't know where that road leads. And with that, the call ended. For a long time, Jessica just sat there, staring at the phone. Her world had fallen apart, but maybe, just maybe, this was the start of something new. It wasn't going to be easy, and it wasn't going to be quick, but she had to find a way to rebuild herself. She had to stop running from the consequences of her actions. Meanwhile, Weston was already living a life he had only dreamed of, a life where he was free to be himself, where he had found genuine love and happiness. And although Jessica couldn't see it yet, her own journey of self-discovery had just begun. Weston sat at his desk, absent-mindedly scrolling through his inbox, when something caught his eye, a message from Jessica. His stomach twisted as he hovered over the subject line, but he clicked it anyway. There was no anger anymore, just a detached curiosity. After all, it had been months since their last encounter, months since she'd tried to win him back, and months since he'd erased her from his life. Yet somehow, she had found a way to re-enter his world. The email opened, the words stark against the white background. Weston's fingers hovered over the keyboard, poised to delete it, but something stopped him. He wasn't sure what. Maybe it was the slight hesitation he still felt when thinking about her. Or maybe it was just the curiosity about what she had to say now. He began to read. Subject: I owe you the truth, Weston. I don't expect this email to change anything between us. I don't expect forgiveness, but I owe you this much. I owe you the truth. When we were together, I wasn't the person you thought I was. I wasn't the woman you loved. I was lost, miserable, insecure, and completely terrified of what I had become. I was so desperate for validation, for attention, for something that made me feel worthy, that I projected my unhappiness onto you. I made you feel like you weren't enough when, in reality, I was the one who wasn't enough for myself. I sought comfort in Greg because he made me feel something, anything, that resembled the affection I thought I deserved. It was never about him. It was never about us. It was about me running from the mess I had become. I know now that I used you, and for that, I'm sorry. I wish you the best, Weston. You deserve someone who sees you clearly, who loves you without trying to fix her own broken pieces through you. I hope you find that person. You have every right to move on, and I understand if you never want to hear from me again. But I needed to tell you the truth. Take care, Jessica. Weston sat back in his chair, the words lingering in his mind. He hadn't expected that. He hadn't expected her to be honest, to lay bare the reasons behind her actions with such rawness. For a moment, the anger he had carried for so long faded. He realized that he wasn't mad at her anymore, not like he had been during those first few weeks after the divorce. She wasn't the same woman anymore. Maybe she never had been. He closed his eyes, letting the weight of her confession settle in his chest. She wasn't asking for redemption, nor was she looking for a way back into his life. She was simply acknowledging the past and her own flaws. Part of him wanted to feel sympathy, to give her some sort of reassurance, but another part of him simply didn't care. Weston had found peace, a peace that had been hard-won, and he wasn't about to let anything from his past disturb it. Not even Jessica's words. He moved the cursor over the email, his finger hovering over the delete button. It would be easy to just get rid of it, to cut this final tie with her. But then he paused. The truth had been laid out before him, raw and unflinching, and there was no need to dwell on it anymore. His silence was the closure they both needed. With a decisive click, he deleted the email. Weston leaned back in his chair and took a deep breath. The past was exactly that past. He had let go of the resentment, the hurt, the bitterness. And now he was free. He stood up from the desk, stretched, and walked to the window, looking out at the bustling city below. Life continued, and so did he. He had built something new, something real. And in that moment, with the morning light streaming through the window, he realized how far he had come. The man he was now was nothing like the man who had been left broken by Jessica's betrayal. He was someone better, someone who had learned to value himself without needing someone else to define him. Meanwhile, across town, Jessica sat in the dim light of her apartment, the email she had sent now just a part of the past. She leaned back in her chair, staring at the screen, waiting for a response that would never come. At first, she had imagined Weston would reply, perhaps with forgiveness, or even just a few words of closure. But deep down, she knew better. She had burned that bridge long ago. She had betrayed the man who had once loved her, and no words could undo the damage. Still, there was a sense of relief in knowing that she had finally confessed, that she had stopped lying to herself about her own flaws. For so long, she had tried to bury her insecurities, to project an image of confidence that wasn't real. Now, she was left alone with the truth. Her phone buzzed, breaking the silence. She glanced down, seeing a message from Greg. He had been quiet for days, his own frustrations simmering beneath the surface. He had not handled the pressure of their financial problems well, and now the tension between them was palpable. She opened the message. "Greg, where's the rent money? This is getting ridiculous. I'm trying, but you're not making it easier." Jessica sighed, rubbing her temples. It was the same thing over and over. The strain of their relationship was wearing her down. She wanted to tell him she was sorry for everything, that she didn't know how they had gotten here. But the words stuck in her throat. She didn't know how to fix it anymore. The truth was that she hadn't just been running from her insecurities, she had been running from herself. And in the process, she had hurt the one person who had truly cared for her. She looked back at the email she had sent to Weston, her hands trembling slightly. It was done. There was no going back. She had told him everything she needed to, and now she would have to live with the consequences. She closed the laptop, stood up, and walked over to the window. The city outside was buzzing with life, people moving about, oblivious to the turmoil within her. She envied them, but deep down, she knew that her journey had only just begun. The road to redemption was long and uncertain, but it was the only path she had left to follow. Weston had moved on, and perhaps that was for the best. He had found his peace, and she had to do the same. The past couldn't be changed, but the future, her future, was still in her hands. And for the first time in a long while, Jessica felt a flicker of hope. The evening air was cool, and the sky stretched wide above Weston and Millie as they sat on the porch, the sun casting its last golden rays over the horizon. It had become a routine, these quiet moments together, far from the chaos of their pasts. As Weston leaned back in the chair, the weight of his life's transformation settled over him. He wasn't the same man who had once agonized over the loss of Jessica. Time had healed the wounds, and the love he now shared with Millie was grounded in something real, something that had taken time to build. Millie shifted beside him, her legs tucked underneath her as she sipped from her mug of tea. "I love this time of day," she said, her voice soft. "It's like the world slows down, just for a minute." Weston smiled, the corners of his lips curling. He didn't need to say anything in reply. Millie had a way of speaking without expecting answers, but in doing so, she always made him feel understood. They sat in silence, their bodies comfortable with the stillness around them, the occasional chirp of birds or rustling of leaves the only interruptions. The past seemed so distant now. Weston had rebuilt his life in ways he hadn't imagined possible. His mornings were no longer filled with the gnawing pain of betrayal. The evenings no longer carried the heaviness of loneliness. He was at peace, not because everything was perfect, but because he had stopped looking over his shoulder. He had stopped wondering what could have been. As the sun sank beneath the horizon, Millie looked at him. "You're quiet tonight?" Weston nodded. "Just thinking." "About what?" He shrugged. "About how far things have come. About how everything changes, whether you want it to or not." She smiled, a knowing look in her eyes. "You've come a long way, Weston. You know that, right?" He glanced at her, his eyes softening. "I didn't think I would. Not back then." Millie reached out, her hand finding his. "But you did. And you're here now." Weston squeezed her hand, the words he couldn't find earlier finally making sense. "Yeah, I'm here." Far away, in a small, run-down apartment, Jessica sat alone. The weight of her choices pressed heavily on her chest. The last few months had been a blur, full of moments of regret and sorrow. She had tried to rebuild, to start over, but the pieces didn't fit. She was different now, but not in the way she had hoped. Her phone buzzed on the table, interrupting her thoughts. She reached for it, the screen lighting up with a notification. She glanced at the message, another one from Greg. The subject line was short. "We need to talk." Jessica sighed. She had seen this coming. Their relationship had been deteriorating for some time now. The financial strain, their unresolved issues, it was all too much for either of them to handle. She opened the message, her fingers trembling. "Greg, I can't do this anymore. I thought we could fix things, but it's clear we're just holding on to something that's already broken. You should have known this wasn't going to work, Jess. I'm done." She stared at the message, the words echoing in her mind. She had known deep down that Greg wasn't the answer. He was just another part of the mess she had made. And now, she was left with nothing. Her thoughts drifted back to Weston, to the life he had created for himself. A life without her. The realization hit her like a cold wave. She had underestimated him. When they were together, she had seen him as weak, someone who could be molded, someone who could be controlled. But now, with the benefit of hindsight, she saw how wrong she had been. Weston had always had a quiet strength that she had failed to recognize. He hadn't needed her to define him, and he certainly didn't need her to feel whole. In the end, he had moved on, while she had been left to pick up the pieces of a life she had shattered. She had pushed him away, convinced that she was the one who needed saving. And now, she was the one in need of redemption. But there was no one left to save her, not Greg, not Weston, no one. A knock at the door broke her reverie, and she wiped her eyes quickly, trying to mask the tears. She didn't want to be seen like this, weak, broken, but she knew better than to avoid the truth now. She opened the door to find a delivery man standing there, holding a small package. "Delivery for Jessica Hayes," he said, offering her the box. She took it without a word, signing for it. Once the man was gone, she sat back down at the table, the small box resting in her hands. She opened it carefully, and inside, she found a simple letter. There was no return address, only her name written in neat handwriting. Her heart skipped a beat when she recognized the handwriting. It was from Weston. Slowly, she unfolded the letter, the words inside simple yet profound. "Jessica, I'm not writing this to reopen old wounds or to offer any kind of solution. I've found peace, and I want you to know that I'm not angry with you anymore. I hope, one day, you can find that peace too. We've both made choices we can't take back. But I'm not looking back, and I don't think you should either. What you do with your life from here on out is up to you. You have the power to make it something different. Take care of yourself. Weston." The letter was brief, but it carried weight. Jessica let out a breath she didn't know she had been holding. There was no anger in his words, no bitterness, only a quiet sense of closure that she hadn't expected. It was clear that Weston had moved on, and in a way, that was the most vindicating thing he could have offered her. He had found peace, and she had to find hers on her own. Back on the porch, Weston sat with Millie, watching as the stars began to appear in the darkening sky. The world felt so different from the place he had been just a few years ago. He had been lost then, full of hurt, full of resentment, but now he was whole. He was finally the person he had always wanted to be, free from the ghosts of the past. Millie squeezed his hand again, a smile tugging at her lips. "You okay?" she asked, her voice gentle. Weston turned to look at her, his expression peaceful. "Yeah," he said quietly. "I'm okay." And for the first time in a long while, he didn't feel the need to look back. The past had shaped him, yes, but it no longer defined him. What mattered now was the life he had built, the love he had found, and the person he was becoming. In the distance, the sound of crickets filled the night air, and Weston smiled. It was a new beginning, a beginning he had fought for, a beginning that belonged to him. And he wouldn't let anything take that away.